Hello, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Emily.
And we are the voices of TARBIS.
And what is TARBIS, I hear you cry?
Well, TARBIS stands for Timely and Relevant Blogging, including sandwiches.
It does indeed. And what does that mean, Carrie?
That is a blog that we set up just about a year ago now, about historical places that we'd been to, places of interest, and basically describing them, giving you a run-through of them, so that you can make up your mind whether to go there or not. 9 times out of 10, we suggest you do.
Yeah, and we give ratings on all different things, from the facilities, to the place itself, to the upkeep, and of course, the cafes.
Because that's all important.
Definitely.
But we decided that we didn't just want to write about things, we wanted to talk about them as well. So we set up a podcast that you're listening to, which is all about people, places, historical events, things of interest that we like to geek out about.
Yep, we wanted to get on another platform because nerding about history is what we do best, and we wanted another way of doing it.
And sharing it with you lovely people. Now, you can listen in, obviously. You can also read our blog and get in touch. How can they do that, Em?
Well, it's using our handle, which is the same for Instagram, Twitter, Facebook and WordPress, and that is at TARBIS History. And TARBIS is all capitals and history is all lowercase.
So come on in, have a listen, drop us a line if you think that there's someone in particular that we should talk about, or, God forbid, we get something wrong.
Definitely, if we get something wrong, I want to know.
So, sit back, relax and enjoy
TARBIS After Hours.
Hello and welcome to TARBIS After Hours. This week we're taking on a much more sombre tone, and rightly so. On the day we're recording this, Sunday the 27th of January, it's the 74th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. It is also Holocaust Memorial Day.
This is a hard subject, but one we felt needs talking about. We may sound quite matter-of-fact at times, but it doesn't mean that we don't feel everything we're saying. But to talk about different things, sometimes we need some distance. As historians, we have the luxury of being objective, but if we are, and we in no way intend to belittle the horror that this was, or what people experienced because of it.
Now, to start, we're not going to automatically assume that you know who Adolf Hitler is. You probably do, but safe not to assume. So we're not going to dwell on him either. Suffice it to say that he was the leader of the Nazi political party, who became Chancellor of what was then understood to be Germany in 1933. We will probably do a later podcast about him as a person. After a number of strategic and sometimes brutal political moves, they became the leading party and Hitler declared himself the Führer, or the head of the state. Whilst the Nazi party effectively ruled Germany, they do not solely represent Germany. There was a lot of extenuating circumstances that led to them taking and maintaining power, but for the sake of this podcast, when we refer to the cause of this, we will say Nazi more often than German. There is an important distinction.
Definitely agreed with you there. After 1933, the Nazi Party started work under Hitler to transform Germany, to make it a strong, proud nation again. In order to do this, they needed someone to blame. Instead of choosing previous ineffective leaders or the harsh actions of the countries that won the First World War and signed the Treaty of Versailles, they directed their anger inwards at certain parts of society they deemed unclean or unworthy to be part of the fatherland. See, Hitler had this idea that Aryans, so the native Caucasians, that were usually blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall, broad-shouldered people, that are stereotypical of the Scandinavian and Germanic regions that were the master race once upon a time.
Okay.
So genetically perfect and superior. In order to make sure that this was the race that conquered, he set up breeding camps to selectively breed his, inverted commas, master race of soldiers, workers and their families. Anybody who didn't fit, himself excluded, was to be dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, what, 5'5", 5'6",
brown
hair, brown eyes, and his grandfather was a Jew.
Yeah.
So, yeah. His main target, without doubt, was the Jewish community, though his grasp did also extend to the Roma, who were gypsies, incurably sick, ethnic Poles and Slavs, Soviet citizens, gay men, Jehovah's Witnesses, and his political rivals. In 1933, Hitler's government passed laws that excluded Jews from civil society, denying them many of the most basic civil rights. They also set up concentration camps not to be confused with death camps. Not all concentration camps were death camps. And this is where they sent those they deemed undesirable. The most prominent of these measures were the 1935 Nuremberg laws, which prohibited marriage and extramarital intercourse between Jews and Germans, and declared that no Jewish woman under the age of 45 could be employed in a German household. This was known as the Law for the Protection of the German Blood and German Honour. The other part of the Nuremberg laws was the Reich citizenship law that decreed only those of German or related blood could be citizens of the Reich. Just an FYI, that's how the Nazi Party referred to their Germany, the Third Reich. Reich meaning realm, and that was harking back to the days of the German Empire, or the Prussian Empire, a glory they were trying to emulate.
Yeah, so he would use a word that he was trying to emulate to kind of secure it, I guess. After Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, ghettos were set up as a way to segregate Jews from the rest of the population. These were often raided, and many were either killed or sent off to the concentration camps. In total, over 42,000 camps, ghettos and similar sites were set up. It wasn't just brute force they employed though. The Nazi government was fatally effective with propaganda.
Yeah, they were really good with propaganda.
Yeah, and through their depiction of Jews as being corrupt, selfish and morally twisted monsters, they succeeded in largely brainwashing the populace into turning against their former neighbours.
Yeah.
And what propaganda couldn't achieve, spies and the Gestapo, or the German secret police, they were dealt with. If you acted to help a lesser or undesirable person, you were guilty by association and you shared their fate.
Yeah. So there was a lot of fear, and fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, and fear is easily spread.
Yeah, easily. I mean, it creates a mass hysteria. So if a couple of people are terrified about this Jewish menace that they've heard so much about, then that's going to spread like wildfire, isn't it? And all of a sudden they become the villain. And then this group of people that are there to step in and help save you from this menace, all of a sudden they become the heroes.
Yeah.
On the 14th of July 1933, the government passed what is commonly known as the Sterilisation Law, allowing for compulsory sterilisation of the disabled, incurable or mentally ill, so that they wouldn't pollute the purity of Hitler's master race. It's estimated that the number of involuntary sterilisations during the Third Reich totalled about 400,000. So that's 400,000 people sterilised, 400,000 bloodlines stopped. Because it's not just them, it's their children, children's children, so on.
Yeah.
Then, in October 1939, Hitler signed a further decree authorising a programme of involuntary euthanasia, mostly directed at adults, but it was also carried out on children. Figures show that within the span of 1939 to 1941, about 100,000 mentally ill adults, 5,000 children and 1,000 Jews were forcefully euthanised in special institutions. A further number was sent to specialist killing centres. All in all, it's estimated that a total of about 150,000 mentally and physically handicapped people died as a result of this law. This was known as Action T4. The programme was stopped in August 1941, but the killing of disabled and mentally ill only ended with the war in 1945. Bodies, or parts thereof, were often sent for medical research, and one scientist, Julius Halvorsen, is recorded as saying, "I accepted these brains, of course. Where they came from and how they came to me was really none of my business."
Right, then there was the Kristallnacht. On the 9th of November 1938, in retaliation for the death of diplomat Ernest von Roth at the hands of Herschel
Greenspan.
Thank you. A Polish Jew, a violent attack known as the pogrom was carried out on Jews across the Reich. Kristallnacht is translated basically into the Night of Broken Glass, and it was mostly carried out by the SS and the SA, Hitler's elite army branches, although some ordinary citizens got caught in the frenzy, which you would if you believed all the Nazi propaganda,
yeah,
and you saw what they were doing, like breaking all of the shops and going in and looting them, you would join in. It's not their fault, it's what they thought.
Yeah, plus there are some people that would just do that. I mean, look at the most recent riots in England a couple of years back. You know, you will get people that will get swept up in it, don't really know what they're doing, they just get swept up in it.
But on this night, over 7,500 Jewish shops were attacked and looted, and over 1,000 synagogues were damaged or destroyed, with their worships, everyone who worshipped them, forced to watch them burn.
Can I just point out, when I was researching this, it says over 7,500. There were only 9,500 Jewish shops at the time, so only 2,000 in the entirety of Germany and the outlying provinces was left.
Wow.
And some of the things that they made them do to watch them burn, they had to kneel before it, bow before the burning synagogue. Some had to dance around the burning synagogue.
During this night, at least 90 Jews died, and the estimated damage caused was in the region of 39 million Reichmarks.
Yeah, that was their currency.
Yeah. 50,000 Jews were sent to camps at Dachau, Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen. Within weeks, many had been released, and 2,000 remained in the camps by early 1939. I've actually been to Sachsenhausen, but we'll talk about that. I will try and talk about that later. Yeah. Within weeks, many had been released, and as I said, 2,000 had remained in the camps. But it wasn't enough that their homes, businesses and places of worship had been destroyed. They had to pay an atonement tax of over 1 billion Reichmarks and were held responsible for the damage. So not only did everything get destroyed, they were held responsible for that and had to pay.
Yeah, it's like, so what, we destroyed your homes, your livelihoods, everything, but it's your fault.
Yeah, pretty much. The government confiscated any insurance payments for the damage, and then a decree was issued on the 12th of November 1938 to ban Jews from holding any occupation. This led many Jews to try and leave the country. There was a mass deportation of Jews to Palestine, although their locations such as Serbia were considered.
Yeah, they considered Siberia as well, and French Madagascar.
Yeah. This was stopped when World War II broke out, and in the end about 60,000 Jews were transported on this scheme. So everything we've said about so far, the amount of people we've said that have been killed over the initial schemes, Kristallnacht, was still before World War II.
Yeah. It wasn't... I mean, World War II didn't start until 1939, so this is between 33 and 39, in the space of 6 years.
Yeah, and all this happened before war broke out.
Yeah. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, they confined Jews, expelled the non-Jewish Poles, and settled Germans on the land they left behind. The centre of Poland became basically a collection of ghettos for the Jews, located in cities with major railway links. We'll come back to why they needed a railway link. They then had their food supplies limited and were forced into manual labour. At least 500,000 Jews died in these ghettos or work camps due to starvation, disease, or the living conditions. It wasn't just in Poland and her immediate neighbours that this sort of thing happened. It also happened in Norway and Denmark after both were occupied, as well as the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium and France. Over 140,000 Dutch, 90,000 Belgian and 300,000 French Jews all were persecuted under the Third Reich. In Croatia under Nazi rule, the leading party known as the Ustaša were responsible for the deaths of about 500,000 Orthodox Christian Serbs as well as Muslims, and Serbia was officially declared free of Jews, so either by deportation or death, declared free of Jews in August 1942. So in Serbia in August 1942 not a single Jew was left alive.
Wow.
Romania carried out pogroms, forced Jews from government service, took their jobs and confiscated property. And in the IHC pogrom of 1941, at least 13,266 Jews were killed, and a further 20,000 in the Odessa massacre later that same year. So you got about 30, nearly 40,000 killed in 1 year. Up to 170,000 Romanian Jews were transported to concentration camps in Transnistria between 1941 and 43. Slovakia sent their Jews to German concentration and extermination camps. Bulgaria sent all 11,000 Jews from the annexed territories of Thrace and Macedonia to their deaths, so no more Jews in Thrace and Macedonia, they're all dead, and a further 8,000 from Sofia. Hungary expelled, but did not deport its Jews until the invasion by Germany in March 1944. After that, over 440,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz. In Budapest, up to 80,000 Jews were killed in 1944 alone.
Wow. I know they're just numbers and you can't kind of fathom them, but still hearing the amount, it's...
They're numbers, but when you stop and think that each and every one of those numbers is a person who has a life as complex and vivid as our own, and they're having to go through all this.
Concentration camps were first set up to house political opponents and enemies of the state, but eventually became the places that Jews and other Reich victims were sent, though not in large numbers until after Kristallnacht. These camps, a death toll, sure, but their original purpose was a labour camp or incarceration centres, not killing centres. The brutal guards
That's my handwriting there. It's supposed to say they initiated.
They initiated a policy of extermination through labour, and many prisoners were often starved or beaten to death. The average lifespan of a prisoner was only around 3 months due to the conditions. Prisoners were being transported, they were packed into cars or on trains, often for days. On arrival, some camps tattooed a number on the prisoner, and you were given a uniform to wear with a coloured badge that corresponded to why you were there. Red triangles were for political prisoners, purple were for Jehovah's Witnesses, black or green were for criminals and asocial people, pink was for gay men, and the yellow six-pointed Star of David for Jews, a corruption of an important religious symbol to them. So not only were the Nazi regime destroying, killing, they were just trying to, I guess, almost humiliate the Jews further by turning their biggest religious symbol into something they had to wear. Yeah, which meant that's why you're here, that's why you're going to be killed, that's why you're going to be put to work.
Yeah, and it wasn't just in the camps, they had to wear that out and about in general public as well, to mark them out as different, as unclean, as this less than human thing.
Yeah, like you said, the government forced Jewish councils that ran the ghettos to provide lists of names for deportation, or they would be shot. Some committed suicide rather than to comply with that. Some sent the least healthy or able to work almost as a sacrifice to save the rest.
So it's basically, give us your people to kill or be killed yourself.
Yeah. Himmler ordered the ghettos to be closed in 1942 in Poland, and most inhabitants were sent to extermination camps. Those fit to work went to concentration camps, and between the 22nd of July and the 12th of September, roughly 285,000 inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto were deported. Some other ghettos were completely emptied. There was some resistance, because you would try, I guess, but it all failed. Jews that weren't deported were shot in the streets or burnt alive. The Einsatzgruppen were 4 SS squads that were responsible for between winter 1941 and 1942 for the deaths of almost 500,000 people. It was the largest killing was the Babi Yar outside Kiev, where 33,771 Jews were killed in one single operation.
Now, we don't know how big the Einsatzgruppen groups were, but 4 squads, let's say a squad is about 20 people, 4 squads of 20 people, and they took out 500,000 Jews.
Yep. And in, one singular operation, 33,000.
Yeah. But this wasn't efficient enough for the Nazis.
No.
They needed a better way. So the gas fan was invented. Bottled gas or exhaust fumes were fed into a sealed compartment, and the people were sealed in there, and they had to breathe that, and that's how they died.
But that wasn't efficient enough.
Still not efficient enough, no.
On the 20th of January 1942, the Wannsee Conference was convened to discuss the final solution to the Jewish question.
That was how they phrased it.
Yes. It's actually it was decided in this really, really gorgeous building in Wannsee, because that was part of when I went with GCSE history in 2004. We went to Berlin and we saw lots of because it was with our Rise and Fall of Hitler module.
Yeah.
And so we went to Sachsenhausen and we went to the building where the Wannsee Conference was held. And it's really odd that it's literally the last place that you would think they would make possibly the worst decision that's ever been made, personally, I would feel.
Yeah.
It's like this big, gorgeous manor house, and they sat and they decided the final solution. During World War II, it had fully begun, and following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and that was blamed by the Jews.
Yeah, so basically World War II was now fully underway.
Yep.
America joined, Japan
Yep.
had joined, everything. But it was all the Jews' fault.
Yep. Deportation was only a temporary solution. What they agreed on was the final solution, and it would result in the death of some 11 million people. To put this into context, this is about roughly 1/5 of the current population of the whole of England, and roughly the entire current population of Belgium.
Yeah. The entirety of Belgium just wiped out.
Just, yeah.
You can't wrap your head around it, can you?
I mean, you say the word 11 million, and it seems, you know that when you get to the millions, it's a big number.
Yeah. But
that's people.
You couldn't
Actual
even
people.
see. Yeah, you couldn't see 11 million people. You couldn't. I mean, that many people you would not be able to see in one go. And that's just 1 million.
No.
So how? This is the hard part. This is how it happened. Victims were taken to extermination camps by train. In places such as Treblinka, Sobibor and Belzec, they went straight to the gas chambers. At Auschwitz, they went through a selection process. Those fit for work were sentenced to slave labour. The rest were made to undress and give their belongings to the workers, who had been brought in previously, and sent to what they were told were showers or delousing chambers. So this was all to keep them calm. Doors were then locked, and Zyklon B pellets were dropped, which released either prussic acid or hydrogen cyanide, both toxic gases. They basically burn you from the inside out. Death occurred within 20 minutes, depending on how close you were to the vents. Obviously, the closer you were, the faster you died. After the shouting and screaming had stopped, the gas was then pumped out, and workers, again Jewish workers, were sent in to retrieve the bodies. Gold fillings in your teeth were removed, and women's hair was cut. In some places, the hair was cut before they went in. Bodies were originally buried in pits and covered with lime, but then in 1942 they were exhumed and burnt. In 1943, new gas chambers and crematoriums were added to accommodate the numbers being killed. At the 3 Reinhard camps, which were Sobibor, Belzec and Treblinka, inmates were killed using diesel and exhaust fumes. At Treblinka, they made the arrival platform look like a train station. They even had a fake clock there and everything so that the victims didn't panic. They buried them in pits, but at Sobibor and Belzec, they exhumed them and burnt the bodies in 1942, and then Treblinka did the same in 1943. They used open fireplaces and then crushed any remaining bones to powder, as it does take an intense heat to fully destroy a body. There were approximately 100 attempted revolts by Jewish captives and 300 prisoners from Sobibor, 100 of whom were recaptured and shot. They didn't even get a chance to try again, they were shot. A mass breakout was then attempted at Auschwitz, and everyone who tried was killed. These actions and atrocities were known about by the Allied nations in reports, but it was deemed that this news shouldn't be spread among the general public for fear that this would overtake other reasons for the war. So America didn't want people to know because they didn't want the war to become just about the Jews. And in Britain, they believed that the majority of people wouldn't believe that it was happening, think it was an exaggeration of what was actually happening. But it was no exaggeration. At the peak of the Holocaust, as it would later become to be known, in spring of 1943, Auschwitz alone was gassing an average of 6,000 Jews a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like you said with the train station to try and make it so they didn't panic, written in most of the concentration camps and the work camps, it had written in German, basically, like, it meant freedom, work means freedom.
Yeah.
So they were told, everything they were told when they got there was, if you work really, really hard, you will be free.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most iconic images of Auschwitz.
Yeah. But, so the Nazis weren't admitting what they were doing out loud. No. Not really. Because, imagine if you said that. We're just killing, we're exterminating a mass amount of people.
Yeah.
And they didn't want revolts because the Jews did outnumber them.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah, so they lied all the time.
They said, written above the gates at Auschwitz, it's Arbeit macht frei, which is work sets you free.
Yep.
Never did.
Nope. It was on the Sachsenhausen gate as well. Gradually, though, it became clear that Germany was losing the war. As the Soviet forces advanced, the Nazis retreated, closing camps as they went. Surviving prisoners were transported to camps nearer Germany, and the dead were disposed of. Death marches were undertaken where survivors were marched, sometimes literally, from a closed camp to an existing one, and anybody that fell behind or simply fell was shot. A total of 250,000 Jews were killed in these marches. Majdanek was the first camp to be discovered by Soviet forces on the 25th of July 1944. Auschwitz was liberated on the 27th of January 1945. Buchenwald on the 11th of April by American forces. The British liberated Bergen-Belsen on the 15th of April. The Americans took Dachau on the 29th of April. The Soviets took Reisenberg on the 30th of April, and Mauthausen was liberated on the 5th of May by Americans. The Red Cross took over Theresienstadt on the 4th of May, with the Soviets arriving days later. The 3 Reinhard camps that you said before about, Treblinka,
Sobibor and Belchek,
were destroyed by Nazis before they could be liberated. BBC war correspondent at the time, Richard Dimbleby, was present when the British liberated Bergen-Belsen. The report he sent home was so graphic that the BBC actually refused to broadcast it until he threatened to resign. Carrie is going to read an extract of what he said.
So they originally broadcast this on the 19th of April, but this is what he sent to them on the 15th of April. Here, over an acre of ground, lay dead and dying people. You could not see which was which. The living lay with their heads against the corpses, and around them moved the awful, ghostly procession of emaciated, aimless people, with nothing to do and with no hope of life, unable to move out of your way, unable to look at the terrible sights around them. Babies had been born here, tiny wizened things that could not live. A mother, driven mad, screamed at a British sentry to give her milk for her child, and thrust the tiny mite into his arms. He opened the bundle and found the baby had been dead for days. This day at Belsen was the most horrible of my life. I mean, that was just an extract. We don't know what the rest of it said.
That's enough.
Yeah. All in all, what I'm about to read are the recorded deaths. I say recorded as no number we give here is really going to be accurate due to the way these poor people were treated as subhuman and not worthy of life. If they weren't worthy to live, they weren't worthy to be written down.
Mm-hmm.
There were 5.9 million Jews, 3 million Soviet prisoners of war, 1.9 million ethnic Poles, 500,000 Serbs, 220,000 Roma, 150,000 disabled, 2,500 Jehovah's Witnesses, all killed, and the number of gay men is not known. The number of Jews given here equated to about 1/3 of the global population at the time, and about 2/3 of that of Europe alone. The Soviet Union, who have such a high population they essentially lost millions by themselves in the war, lost a total of approximately 2,100,000 Jews. Poland, who are a much smaller country, reportedly lost the exact same number. Although people of colour, it isn't known if this is exclusive to Afro-Germans, Asians or other minorities, were imprisoned, sterilised and murdered, there wasn't really a plan to kill them on the scale of the other groups. Obviously, this does not in any way diminish what they went through, but we don't have a number for them as a group.
No. And whilst Hitler, by committing suicide, essentially escaped justice. The Nuremberg trials, held in the Nuremberg, Germany, tried a total of 209 Nazi war criminals and their allies, including the leaders of the SS, the SA and the Gestapo. A number of these trials resulted in execution, though that is a small consolation to the survivors. Sadly, it was not the last genocide of the last century, and it is something that could very easily happen again if the wrong person in power gets the wrong idea.
I think the thing that gets to me the most about it, though, is that there are people out there who still refuse to believe that the Holocaust happened. They think it was all a hoax. Now, I've never been to a concentration camp, though I have been to the tunnels underneath Jersey, which is part of the English Channel Islands. They were occupied by German forces, and that was emotional enough, seeing where they kept some of their prisoners of war and hearing the stories. And they did tie some of it back to concentration camps as well there.
Yeah.
And that was very emotional. I would like to go. I think "like" is the wrong word, but I would like to go to Auschwitz one day.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like for you going to a concentration camp?
Strange, very, very, very strange. You know, you've heard that where things of mass devastation and trauma, animals, not a single bird flew over Sachsenhausen.
It leaves a scar, apparently.
Yeah, no, and it's not that you would, but you physically couldn't. As soon as you walked through the gates, you physically couldn't feel anything joyous, happy. You couldn't smile. Not that you'd want to,
yeah,
but you physically couldn't. And you just walk in and you just see just the gravel, and there's like bits, because one of the things they used to do is to try and get they'd get the Jewish workers to wear German army boots and just run up and down these gravel pits until the shoes broke and they cut themselves, because then they would know how long the boots would last.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and there was this kind of like a museum in one of the halls which had a load of children's shoes in a pile, and some of the teeth and the jewellery, and some woman put all of her rings underneath, like, you know, you've got a shoe.
Yeah.
I'll describe a shoe.
Yeah.
With a heel.
Yeah.
You take the sole out, and she hid her rings and her jewellery in her shoe. And that was then, they weren't found by the Germans at the time because they're in the museum that you can see.
Yeah.
We actually went into, there were some chambers, and they've actually, when I went, this was in 2004, so I can't say if it's still like that now, but when I went there was still blood on the walls, and there was still pellets where the guns had fell, where bullets had fell, and we went into this one bit where we were walked downstairs in the side of a building, and we went in, and it was like showers, and these were showers, these ones were. And then we went upstairs, and we didn't know where we were, and we went upstairs, and we were just actually in a morgue.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was just like so harrowing, to the fact that I can still recall in such detail a place that I visited. I'm just trying to think how long, 15 years ago. So I was 15 when I went.
That's
it. Yeah. It
leaves a mark with you.
It does, and it's something that you can't explain, and it kind of does put it into perspective for you. When you're told of how the Jewish people lived, you can be told. I could sit here and we could tell you that they slept like 20 in a room that should only had like 5 beds in it, or the beds were piled, bunk beds were like 4 in a row, and you can think, oh, you know, that would be quite small, but when you go in and you see how small,
yeah,
like, and I think they actually showed it because obviously it has been shown in some movies, but I don't know if you've seen the actual movie of The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas.
I've read the book, I haven't seen the film.
The book is actually a lot more brutal than the film, because obviously with the 2 young child actors, they knew it would be shown in schools, so the film isn't as brutal as the book.
Yeah.
But the way they show the living conditions of Schmuel and his family when Bruno gets into the camp,
yeah,
it's actually quite light. Their research was good.
I really do. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming you recommend the film. I do recommend the book because it is written from the point of view of a child.
Yeah.
But if you know enough about it, you know to go, oh no, at the right moments. And it's not. I don't often get that much of an emotional response. I mean, I love books. I enjoy them. But if something sad happens in a book, I'll read it and think, oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
This, I sat there at the end going, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
And I cried.
Yeah.
I put the book down and I just wanted to throw it across the room because of how it made me feel. And that's just a book.
Yeah. We need to. Well, I'll introduce you to the film.
I know you've seen Schindler's List.
Yeah. Which
is incredibly, incredibly well done, and I love the idea that it's all in black and white, apart from that one little girl with a red coat.
Little girl's red coat.
That was, and at the end, the way Liam Neeson delivers that speech at the end, this pin could have saved one more. It's incredible. But have you ever seen a film called The Pianist?
I've been told by very many, many people about that film.
It's about, if I remember right, because it's been a long time since I watched it. It's Adrian Brody, and it's about a pogrom in a ghetto, and he is a Jewish pianist, and he's trying to escape the soldiers, and it's about his story. And it's really, I don't normally watch war films because I don't think that the war is something that should be glorified in films, and some films do glorify it, but that one was almost on a par with Schindler's List.
Wow.
Almost. I do also want to watch The Book Thief as well. Apparently that's quite good.
That's good, and that book's good also.
Yeah.
But like I said with you, I agree with you when it comes to war films sometimes. But I think that because it wasn't that long ago, but I don't know if many people know about it. So these films, if they're done correctly, it's a way of preserving. You don't want to preserve this history, but in a way you do, because you never want it to happen ever again.
Yeah, it's not a case of you want to preserve it, you need to preserve it.
Yeah, it does need to be preserved. The stories need to be told.
Yeah, that's why I think things like the Royal British Legion, they do a fantastic job with the Poppy Appeal every year, and things like that. And you have Remembrance Day.
And today, the Holocaust Memorial Day.
The number of Memorial Days, especially over the past couple of years, it's been centenary of the First World War, and coming up in about 20 years' time, you've got the centenary of the Second. I think that one's good. I mean, the First World War centenary was bad enough. I think what's going to come up in the Second World War, the first one was devastating, the second was monstrous. It really was. And it didn't need to happen on that scale.
No.
If the right people had done the right things at the right time, it wouldn't have happened. And literally millions of lives could have been saved. But
definitely.
Shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Yeah. And this has been, and rightly so, like you said, quite a sombre episode. And normally, faithful listeners, you will know that we do ridiculous deaths.
Yeah, didn't seem appropriate somehow.
There's not a single death within this that I would want to do ridiculous-wise.
No.
So very similar to what we did when we did the Battle of Britain. We're doing a ridiculous, a survival story. Now we've got a couple of survival stories. I'm going to read one out, and you can do one, because I think it's good to end on not a high, but just know what people did, the kind of like their resolve. Yeah. People's resolve. So I'm going to speak. This was written on August the 5th, 1993.
Okay.
It is about a guy called Moshe Pear.
Okay.
And I'm just going to read this out. As an 11-year-old boy, he was held captive at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. He was sent to the gas chamber at least 6 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, now each time he survived, watching with horror as many of the women and children gassed with him collapsed and died. Now, to this day, as in 1993, Pierre didn't know how he was able to survive. He didn't know. He said, in his words, "Maybe children resist better, I don't know."
Okay.
But in 93 he was 60, so he's now looking at...
He's getting on to 90s.
Yes.
Now.
Yeah, I was trying to work that out. Quick maths. After everything we've spoken about, my brain isn't on maths right now.
Then you want numbers right now.
Yes, and he spoke at a congregation at St. Laureate about... He's written a book about his experience as a Holocaust survivor. In 1942, at the age of 9, Pierre and his younger brother and sister were arrested by police in their homeland of France. His mother was sent to Auschwitz and never returned. Now, he said that he will never be able to recreate for anybody the living hell that he experienced. The conditions in the camp were indescribable, he said. You can't bring home the horror. Pierre and his siblings were sent to Bergen-Belsen 2 years later. He recalls the separation from his parents as excruciating, but surviving the horrors of the camp quickly became priority. Bergen-Belsen was worse than Auschwitz because there people were gassed right away. They didn't suffer a very long time. So in Auschwitz, that you were sent to die because it was the death camp.
Yeah.
Bergen-Belsen wasn't a death camp. He said that Russian prisoners were kept in an open-air camp like stallions and were given no food or water. Some people went mad with hunger and turned to cannibalism. His day would begin with a roll call of the numbered prisoners, which would last as long as 5 hours, while their captors calculated how many prisoners had died. Anyone who fell during the roll call was then beaten on the spot. After roll call, the prisoners returned to their barracks, where they were given a tiny piece of bread and some coloured water. Pierre and his siblings, who all survived, so him, his brothers and his sister, they all survived, and they were cared for at the camp by 2 women who Pierre has unsuccessfully been able to find. So he tried to find the women who cared for them, but he hasn't been able to.
Okay.
Children being children, they did play, sometimes chasing each other around the barracks, but there would always be someone who was too sick or too weak to get up. After the war, Pierre was reunited with his father in Paris, and they all moved to Israel. So out of the whole family, only the mother died because she was sent straight to Auschwitz. He had 4 children in Israel, and he served in the Israeli army in a number of wars, but he moved to Montreal in 1974. He said that he is still haunted by his concentration camp experience and still find his memories keep him awake at night. But what he's most bitter about, and like you said, kind of, is that the way the rest of the world stood by and let it happen. Yeah. He said, no one told the Germans not to do it. They had the permission of the world.
I think by the time we got the reports and everything for it, not condoning that at all.
No.
We were already at war. And I think at that point it was a case of, well, we're already here, we might as well keep going.
Yeah.
And add this to the list of why they're the villains.
Yeah. So Monsieur Pierre survived 6 gas chambers at least, and was reunited with his brothers, sisters and his father. Which I think is what resolve to be able to keep going after you know that people have tried to kill you many times.
I mean, you can't imagine the level of resolve it would take to survive something like that.
And as a child as well.
Yeah.
Because I guess as adults you keep going for your children, you keep going for your loved ones, you keep going.
Yeah.
But how does a child get that mentality at 11 years old?
It's just your natural survival instincts, but as far as he's concerned, he doesn't know what's going on. He'd be terrified anyway. And as soon as he does realise, as far as he's concerned, his family's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from him on to Edith Fox, who she's only recently come out about her Holocaust story. After surviving 4 years in Auschwitz as a teenager, She waited 2 years before emigrating to the United States, where she ended up in Buffalo, where she met her husband Joseph, and they raised 3 children there. She now lives in Tucson, Arizona, and in recent months, her health has begun to fail, so she decided at the age of 90 she didn't want her story dying with her, she wanted to tell her story.
This was in 2015,
yeah.
This one, yeah.
She was concerned that people were forgetting about the Holocaust, and she was horrified, rightly so, to hear that some people deny it ever took place.
Yeah, like you said before.
This is her story in her own words. My name is Edith Fox, maiden name Weingarten. I was born and lived in Czechoslovakia in a town called Teplice, which is called Teplice before 1948. My mother, Giselle Weingarten, never talked about her parents, so I don't know what happened to them, but her big brother raised her and her 2 other sisters. At that time in Europe, we didn't discuss family matters. In my time, all I did was go to school, prepare food, play with my friends and do homework. My mother was married to my father, Mano Fogel, who worked at the lumber yard. She had a fabric store. She was always a businesswoman. I was the youngest in my family. I had 5 brothers. They were very protective of me. Their names were Heskel, Ignat, Sam, Harry and Zygmunt. 2 of my brothers were drafted into the Czech army. I was 13 years old when the war started in 1941. Nazis came and rounded us up, my parents and my 3 other brothers. They told us to take our personal belongings. They also told us they would take us to Poland, which at the time was divided, occupied by Germans and Russians. They told us we would get homes and businesses for free. Instead, when we got to Poland, the Nazis made us run. If you couldn't run, you'd be killed. They killed my mother right in front of me. She couldn't run fast enough. I grabbed her. It was too much for a child to see. I told the Nazis to kill me too, but they said, no, you are going to work. People were dying in front of me. I saw a rabbi who was lying in the corner with his feet cut off, but he was still alive. He was lying out there until he died. It was unbelievable what they did. They separated men and women, and after that I never saw my father or my brothers again. They took me and my friend Leah to the ghetto in Stanislaw in Poland, where all the toddlers of Jewish families were housed. We had to wash the diapers of 300 babies. We found out that the Nazis were coming to take us all. We asked the adults caring for the children if we could go into the bunker with them to be safe, but there was no room, so Leah and I went into the cellar where the furnace was and climbed into its chimney to hide. The Nazis came and threw all the children into trucks like trash. Then they killed everyone in the bunker. Leah and I stayed there hiding near the furnace for 3 days. Then we walked and walked, trying to get to the Czech border with Hungary. We saw a Czech soldier and thought he would help us, but he was controlled by the Nazis and was going to turn us in at the headquarters near Auschwitz. At the last minute he let us go, telling us to go with God. We hid in the gutter. Leah wanted to go home, but she was killed when she tried. I was recaptured. They took me to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and I was all alone there. I didn't know what happened to the rest of my family. I was sent to the line where Joseph Mengele sent people to the right or to the left. To the left, people were killed. To the right, they were sent to work. One day they came and took us, 50 girls. We thought they were going to kill us, but instead they got us to Gleifitz near Auschwitz and put us to work at an ammunition factory. We had to stand in line for 8 hours and were not allowed to talk to anybody. We had to clean a little light with a stick of black soot. They made bullets out of it. I worked there for about 3 years or so. Whilst I was in Auschwitz, I saw too many things. Some people couldn't take it anymore and ran into the electrified fence to kill themselves. They just went up in flames. I saw people coming into Auschwitz from different places who were sent to take a shower and were killed. Then they took them to the crematorium. I met a boy who was watching the crematorium where he had seen his parents die. He was hoping they would come and bomb the place. He told me to come to that spot once a week and he'd throw me a package. Shoes or clothes. Maybe they were from people they killed in the gas chamber, I don't know. It was unbelievable. They were so organised they said they wanted to kill 10,000 Jews every day. As the war was ending, Nazis put all of us who were strong enough and could still run fast, the young ones, on a freight train with open box cars without water, without food. They wanted us to die. 3 days I was on that train. People were dying, stepping on everybody, lying on the floors. There were already dead bodies. 3 days I was on that train. Finally I said, no, I don't want to be stepped on, so I jumped off the train. I jumped during the night when the train was moving slowly. I didn't want people to step on me. I decided if I die, I'd rather die outside in the snow. It was January. Many people were shot after they jumped off the train, but there were not so many who had the courage to jump. I kept running and running. I hit a tree and bumped my forehead. I thought I was shot, but then I realised it was only a small injury from running into something. I was in Mala Pevnost, Czech territory. I was hurt and I still have a mark. I don't know exactly where I was. I was in the woods. I was waiting for daytime to figure out where to go. I saw a person in a Czech uniform. I was so happy, and I figured that a Czech soldier will never give me trouble. The war was ending. They knew they lost the war, but it was a Nazi in a Czech uniform. He was taking me to Genocide camp, where there were 7 girls with me. I don't know where they came from. They were caught running away too, but the Germans caught them. When they were taking us, they put us in a house and were going to rape us. The first girl, a 13-year-old, started screaming and fighting them, so they pushed everyone else out. They killed the girl who was screaming and put up such a fight. They shot her. She saved the rest of us. Nazis wanted to starve us, but we survived. We had nothing. It was a toilet and the floor, cement and little windows, that's it. The Nazis would come in and kick us in the heads and call us swine and ask us, how are you still alive? Only one of the girls died. From January until May we were there, but then we were lucky. The Russians liberated us on May the 8th. They were just in time because the Nazis had already killed all the political prisoners and we were next. The Russians took us to the hospitals. We couldn't even walk. At the hospital they tried to help us get jobs. I said I wanted to go to America. They smuggled us from Czechoslovakia to Germany to get to the place where I could register to go to America. I didn't want to go home. There was no one there. It took me 2 years to get to America. I was staying in the displaced person camp run by Americans. While I was waiting, I volunteered at the hospital. I was 17 when I registered and 19 when I came to America. First I came to New York City. They told me they'll fix my nose, which I broke when I jumped off the train, if I leave New York City. That's how I moved to Buffalo. Everyone wanted to live in the big city. I said, I'll go to Buffalo because I want to fix my nose. It was all flat. They fixed my nose in Buffalo. I didn't do anything for 3 or 4 weeks and they put me to work. I never went back to school. I only finished 8th grade when the war had started. 2 years later I met my husband, Joseph Fox, through my future sister-in-law. Her parents came from Israel and stayed in that same house where I had a room. That's how I met her and that's how I met him. I worked as a manager of apartments, fixing them up, dealing with the mortgage loans. My husband had a good job as an electrical assembly line technician in Bell Helicopter in Buffalo. We raised 3 children in Buffalo, 2 sons and a daughter. Then we moved to Tucson for my husband's health, but he died in 1997. We have 6 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. My brothers Sam and Zygmunt survived the concentration camp. Sam moved to New York, Zygmunt moved to Argentina, but I don't know what happened to the rest of my family. I looked for them after the war but could never find them. I wanted to tell my story because I'm afraid people are forgetting. We can never forget what happened. We can never let it happen again. Just one last thing before we go. A little bit of happiness and a little bit of faith in humanity. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, there was a young British stockbroker who was called Nicholas Winton, and he did something pretty incredible. He risked his life to successfully save 669 mostly Jewish children from Czechoslovakia during the Holocaust by ensuring them safe passage to Britain. He's actually been dubbed as the British Schindler. He was later knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2003 and received the Czech Order of the White Lion in 2014. He sadly died on the 1st of July 2015 aged 106. But that's not, like, his knighthood and everything isn't the bit I'm getting to. I don't know if you ever remember the TV show That's Life? Yeah. It basically, for those of you that don't know, it's a TV show where you go on and you're usually surprised by the audience, like you're sitting in the audience or something, and you're surprised and they tell the story of your life. In 1988, he was actually invited as a member of the audience. What he didn't realise, that all the rest of the audience sitting around him were alive just because of him. They were the people, the children, and the children of the children he had saved.
Wow.
So,
you need to put a link to that YouTube video.
Yeah, there is a YouTube video about it, and tissues at the ready. Really. On that note, we'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.
And we shall speak with you next Tuesday.
Goodbye.